Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of MindFuel Daily, the podcast that fuels your mind with ideas that make life better. I'm Alex.
And I'm Jamie. Today we're diving into a topic that almost everyone can relate to, procrastination.
That thing you've been putting off.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all know that feeling. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something incredibly human, procrastination.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, you shared a really insightful discussion from the MindFuel Daily podcast. What's fascinating about their take is how they look beyond just simple laziness.
Right.
To understand the real drivers behind why we delay things, and maybe more importantly, what you can actually do about it.
Right. Because the usual story we tell ourselves is that we're just, not motivated enough. But what this source material highlights is that it's often about something deeper, our response to feeling, uncomfortable.
Precisely. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack those key insights from the MindFuel Daily conversation and give you, the listener, a clear understanding of why you might be stalling on certain tasks, along with some practical ways to approach them with a bit more ease.
Okay, so let's get into it. The MindFuel Daily hosts started by pinning down exactly what procrastination is. It's not just chilling on the couch, is it?
You've got it. They made a really crucial distinction. Procrastination is actively putting off tasks, even when you know it might lead to negative consequences down the line.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a deliberate choice to delay, even if it doesn't quite feel that way in the moment. It's not the same as simply needing a break or, choosing to do something else intentionally.
And they brought up a really interesting point about what's happening in our brains when we procrastinate this kind of tug of war between our long-term goals and our desire for right now happiness. Can you break that down a bit?
Yeah, what's fascinating here is the interplay between two key areas of your brain. Think of your prefrontal cortex as the responsible adult in your brain, right? The part that makes plans and understands future consequences.
Okay.
But then you have the limbic system, which is more like your inner child.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about immediate rewards and avoiding discomfort. So when a task feels tough or unpleasant, that inner child in your limbic system can often overpower the responsible adult, leading you to seek out something that feels good right now, like, scrolling through your phone.
So that urge to suddenly reorganize your spice rack instead of tackling that big project, that's the inner child winning.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The MindFuel Daily discussion emphasized that procrastination often becomes a way to dodge those uncomfortable feelings, stress, anxiety, maybe even boredom that are linked to the task.
Makes sense.
Of course, as they rightly pointed out, putting things off usually just creates more stress in the long run.
Oh, definitely. Now, they really dug into the why behind all this delaying, and a few of the reasons they mentioned really kind of hit home. Fear of failure was a big one. It's like we'd rather not try than risk not being good enough.
That's a powerful motivator for procrastination, yeah. If we connect this to how we see ourselves, many people unfortunately tie their sense of worth to their achievements. So facing a challenging task can feel like putting your entire self-esteem on the line. The source material touched on how this fear can actually make procrastination a go-to defense mechanism. By not starting, you avoid the potential sting of failure,
It's like a weird kind of self-preservation almost, and then there's perfectionism, that little voice in your head that says it has to be just right.
Oh, yeah.
Which often leads to not starting at all.
Precisely. That relentless pursuit of an impossible ideal can be incredibly paralyzing. The fear of not meeting those sky-high standards you set for yourself leads to delaying the start or even completion of the task.
Huh.
It's a subtle way of avoiding the vulnerability that comes with imperfection.
And what about when you're just not feeling it, like low motivation, or when a task feels about as exciting as watching paint dry, what they call task aversion?
These are definitely major hurdles. Low motivation can stem from all sorts of things. Maybe you don't see the value in the task, or perhaps you're just feeling burned out in general. And task aversion. Think of that report that feels like wading through treacle, or that endless spreadsheet that just makes your eyes glaze over. Your brain naturally wants to steer clear of things it perceives as unpleasant or difficult.
The MindFuel Daily discussion also pointed out how procrastination can become this never-ending loop. You delay, then you feel guilty about delaying, which makes you feel worse about yourself, and that makes it even harder to start. It's a real downward spiral.
It is, absolutely. Those negative emotions we heap on ourselves, the guilt, the shame, actually create a mental state that makes it even harder to get started. It's like trying to push a car uphill with the brakes on. This emotional baggage just reinforces the avoidance behavior.
And it was kind of eye-opening when they talked about how procrastination isn't always someone just sitting around doing nothing. Sometimes it's disguised as being really busy.
This is such a key insight. What's fascinating here is how our brains can cleverly trick us into feeling productive while we're actually avoiding the real priorities. You might find yourself suddenly needing to alphabetize your bookshelves or, I don't know, spending hours on less important emails. It gives you that little hit of accomplishment. But it's a way of sidestepping the task that truly matters. Have you ever noticed yourself doing something similar when faced with a big deadline?
Oh, absolutely. Suddenly, every other task in the universe becomes urgent. Okay, so we're getting a good handle on what procrastination is and why we do it. Now, the MindFuel Daily conversation moved on to this idea that there are different types of procrastinators. This was really helpful in thinking about my own tendencies.
Yes, this is where it gets really interesting. Recognizing these different patterns can give you a much clearer picture of what's driving your procrastination. They talked about the perfectionist, that person who can't start until they feel everything is absolutely perfect.
Which it never is.
Which, of course, it never is. Exactly.
Right. That fear of not getting it 100% right keeps them stuck at zero. Then there was the dreamer, someone overflowing with brilliant ideas but struggling to actually, get them off the ground.
Yeah. The dreamer loves the exciting part, the initial vision. But they often stumble when it comes to the nitty-gritty of planning and execution. The practical steps feel less inspiring, so they tend to stay in the realm of ideas rather than action. Does that resonate with anyone you know, maybe even yourself?
Definitely rings a bell. And then there's the crisis maker, the one who swears they work best under pressure, always leaving things to the absolute last minute. I think a lot of people secretly identify with this one, even if it's a stressful way to operate.
Mm-hmm. The crisis maker often mistakes the adrenaline rush of a looming deadline for genuine productivity. While they might get things done, this approach usually comes at a cost, increased stress, potential for errors, and it's just not a sustainable long-term strategy. That adrenaline can be addictive, though, which reinforces the pattern.
And finally, the busy procrastinator, the person who's constantly ticking things off their list, just never the most important things.
Exactly. They're masters of looking busy, tackling all the low-hanging fruit, while avoiding the core tasks that would actually move them forward. It's a way to feel productive without confronting the real challenge.
Seeing these different types laid out is so helpful. It makes you think, okay, maybe it's not just that I'm lazy. Maybe I'm falling into this perfectionist trap. Or perhaps I'm a classic busy procrastinator.
That self-awareness is the crucial first step, really. Once you start to recognize your own procrastination style, you can begin to understand the specific fears or discomforts that are triggering it, and then you can start to develop strategies that are actually tailored to your needs.
So how do we actually break free from these patterns? The MindFuel Daily host offered some really practical advice. The first thing they emphasized was awareness, really understanding why you're avoiding a particular task.
Absolutely. Before you can change the behavior, you need to understand the emotion behind it. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the sheer size of the task, anxious about the potential outcome, maybe just plain bored? Identifying that underlying feeling is key to finding the right solution. For instance, if you're feeling anxious, strategies to manage anxiety might be helpful,
Then they talked about breaking down those massive, intimidating tasks into much, much smaller steps. It sounds simple, but it really can make a difference, can't it?
It's a fundamental technique because it directly tackles that feeling of being overwhelmed. When you break a huge project down into tiny, actionable steps, like really tiny, it suddenly feels much less daunting and much easier to get started. That example they used, write a paper, becoming brainstorm ideas for the introduction, or even just write the first sentence of the first paragraph, perfectly illustrates how to make the initial hurdle feel manageable.
I'm a big fan of the Pomodoro technique, which they also mentioned those focused bursts of work with short breaks in between. It's like tricking your brain into getting started.
The Pomodoro technique is brilliant for overcoming that initial resistance. Knowing you only have to focus for, say, 25 minutes can make even an unpleasant task feel less unbearable. And those short breaks give your mind a chance to reset, preventing burnout and helping you maintain focus over longer periods. Have you found that it helps you get started on things you'd normally avoid?
Definitely. Knowing there's a break coming up makes it easier to just dive in for that short burst. And they also highlighted the importance of self-compassion. Beating yourself up for procrastinating just seems to make the whole thing worse, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right. Self-criticism just fuels those negative emotions we talked about earlier, the guilt and shame. which can actually reinforce the cycle of procrastination. Treating yourself with kindness and understanding when you slip up creates a more supportive internal environment, making it easier to pick yourself up and try again. It's not about being perfect.
Finally, they touched on the impact of our surroundings, minimizing distractions like notifications, and maybe even using website blockers to create a focused environment. That seems pretty key today.
Oh, incredibly key. Our modern world is basically designed to grab our attention constantly. So by intentionally removing those distractions, silencing notifications, closing unnecessary tabs, maybe finding a quiet workspace if you can, you're essentially setting yourself up for success. It reduces the temptation to stray and makes it easier to concentrate on the task at hand.
Okay, so to bring it all together, the MindFuel Daily conversation gave us a really actionable plan, like a toolkit, for dealing with procrastination.
Yes, and it really boils down to a few key steps. First, try to identify the specific emotion you're feeling when you want to delay a task. What's really going on? Second, break that task down into the tiniest possible steps. Seriously small.
Like ridiculously small.
Exactly. Third, use a timer, even if it's just for 5 minutes to get started. Just begin. Fourth, create a space that minimizes distractions as much as possible. And finally, maybe most importantly, be kind to yourself throughout the process and acknowledge every bit of progress you make, no matter how small.
And the really empowering takeaway here, I think, is that procrastination isn't a sign of some fundamental flaw in your character. It's not laziness. It's often just a signal that you need to try a different approach or maybe shift your perspective a bit.
Precisely.
Yeah.
By understanding procrastination as a response to discomfort rather than some personal failing, you empower yourself to approach it with curiosity and a willingness to experiment with different strategies until you find what works best for you as an individual.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, it's pretty clear that understanding your own procrastination habits is, well, an ongoing journey of self-discovery, isn't it?
Indeed. And maybe take a moment later today to consider this. What is the most common emotion you experience in those moments right before you decide to put something off? Is it overwhelm, fear, boredom? Just bringing that feeling into conscious awareness is a really powerful first step.
And remember, overcoming procrastination isn't about becoming some kind of productivity robot. It's about understanding yourself better and learning to navigate those moments of resistance with more awareness and, yeah, a little bit of self-compassion. It's a process of learning what helps you get unstuck.